Hello everyone, Books with Banks back again, and I'm finally back to talk about more Shakespeare. I've talked about all of Shakespeare's history plays to varying degrees. I also have a video about Shakespeare's film and TV adaptations. I also did a review kind of analysis of A Midsummer Night's Dream, importantly not a history, but more appropriately classified as a comedy. You'll see why that's important for today's video. The play I want to talk about today is The Tempest, also classified as a comedy. While it does have comedic moments and hijinks, I'm actually talking about this one more for the same reason I talked about it Midsummer Night's Dream. These two plays are early examples of fantasy storytelling in the modern English language. I would actually argue, now having read both, that The Tempest is much closer to what we'd call a fantasy story today, and this book also touches, or this play also touches on interesting themes prevalent in modern fantasy. Before getting too far into my discussion of the play, however, it would mean a lot if you could like and share the video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thank you so much, and here we go. Or actually, I guess, spoiler warning, but I mean, it's a very, very old play, so spoilers are whatever. So, here's how I'm going to structure this video about The Tempest. I'll start with a brief synopsis of the story, and then I'll talk a little bit about when the play was written, originally published, as well as this edition that I just recently read. Then I'll get into the two kind of big ideas and my two biggest takeaways with this play. These are, first and foremost, the magic at hand and the fantasy elements, what fantasy actually looks like in the play, and in a lot of Shakespeare for that matter. And secondly, we need to talk about reading this in the present day through a more of a post-colonial, anti-imperial sort of lens. So, let's get going. The Tempest tells the story of Prospero, an exiled Duke of Milan, living in exile on an island in the Mediterranean Sea with his daughter Miranda. The two of them have been living here on this island for 12 years, and Miranda is maybe like in her late teens or so, or maybe early 20s. Prospero was exiled here when his brother Antonio, along with the neighboring Duke of Naples, Alonso, when Antonio and Alonso both conspired against Prospero to get him dethroned and sent away. Now the two friends, Antonio the usurper and Alonso, rule Milan and Naples respectively. At the start of the play, the Duke of Naples, Alonso, is returning home from marrying his daughter off to a prince in Africa. Alonso is accompanied by his brother Sebastian and his friend and Prospero's brother, who we've already mentioned, Antonio, who's now the new Duke of Milan. Alonso also has his son Ferdinand with him, and an old advisor and friend of these more devious lords, but also an old friend of Prospero, this older gentleman named Gonzalo. This group, Alonso, brother Sebastian, son Ferdinand, friend Antonio, and friend Gonzalo, along with a few servants and workers and guards, they're caught in a horrible storm and shipwrecked on an island, and of course the island that they're shipwrecked on is Prospero and Miranda's island, where they've been for 12 years. Prospero is a sorcerer with command over spirits, and one spirit in particular named Ariel. Prospero works his magic with Ariel to start a storm and bring these travelers to his island. For two of them, his brother Antonio and the Duke of Naples, Alonso, they were once Prospero's enemies. But our sorcerer, our main character here, he has ideas for the other passengers as well. The first thing that happens when they crash is Ferdinand, the Duke's son, is separated from everyone else, and he thinks they've all perished. He runs into Miranda, and these two young lovebirds fall quickly for each other, although their love and courtship of one another is kind of simultaneously criticized but encouraged by Prospero and his trusty enslaved spirit Ariel. Their goal is to get these two kids together, but Prospero in particular also takes a lot of pleasure, I think, out of and kind of the opportunity to poke fun at and mess with Ferdinand and make him doubt if he's good enough for Miranda, this sort of thing. Meanwhile, Alonso, Sebastian, and Antonio, with some guards, and Gonzalo, they are all on a different part of the island. They think Ferdinand has died. And this group, Ariel and Prospero, start messing with them as well. Remember, Antonio betrayed Prospero to get the dukedom of Milan, and so now the wicked Antonio is trying to convince Sebastian to do the same thing to his brother, Alonso, to kind of like mirror the situations. But these plans of betrayal go nowhere because Prospero and Ariel start messing with this group, first presenting them with a magical performance of all these island peoples and spirits dancing around and bringing out a feast. But then a harpy shows up, and I'm pretty sure this was actually just Ariel disguising himself as the harpy, and the harpy basically points out how wicked and evil Alonso, Antonio, and Sebastian all are. Now, Gonzalo doesn't get too much criticism because he's more just a wise commentator, making kind of these strange allusions and like references and trying to bring logic into the situation. Even when he points out the truth of the situation, when he tries to use reasoning and stuff with these companions, they all just kind of keep making fun of him, kind of playing into the comedic side of the Shakespearean comedy. But yeah, because Gonzalo was always a friend of Prospero, it makes sense that Gonzalo is not really a target of any of the spirits' criticism. Anyway, jumping back to Ferdinand and Miranda, the two of them get married, and then they run into Ferdinand's father. That whole group, everyone is so happy that they're actually all still alive. They reunite, for the most part, realizing how foolish and deceitful and cruel they've been. All in all, it's a happy ending. Prospero is restored as the rightful Duke of Milan. He's actually not too, like, he doesn't kill anyone or anything. The ship and all the ship's crew, they're all recovered and everything's good to go. Everyone is sent on their way. Prospero frees Ariel for doing such a wonderful job at their little games, magical kind of games and manipulations throughout the play. So, that's what most of the play is about. However, there are a few other characters that I didn't mention because I think Shakespeare's inclusion of them and their storyline serves such a different purpose and centers around a different idea entirely compared to the rest of the play. The gist of this other story is not only has Prospero worked his sorcery to enslave the spirit Ariel, but Prospero also, in effect, has enslaved the only native inhabitant of this island, a monster named Caliban. Caliban is characterized as a beastly native and spawn of the witch who used to rule the island. Duke Alonso's drunken butler and jester, they also washed ashore at the beginning of the play. And these two characters, Trinculo and Stefano, I haven't mentioned yet. They're basically the third branch of this broken up and shipwrecked party. First there's Ferdinand, then the Duke and guards and advisors, and then these two, the jester and butler. Stefano and Trinculo, they find Caliban, they get him ridiculously drunk along with themselves, and then Caliban drunkenly tries to get these two to help him escape his enslavement and to help him kill Prospero. These three characters fail miserably because they're so drunk, and nothing changes for any of their circumstances, really, even though the rest of the play, everyone else kind of winds up in a little bit of a better spot. So hopefully you might be able to see a little bit of why I wanted to talk about this story separately, why I kind of saved it for the end of the synopsis, but I'll get into a deeper analysis of this part of the story later on. For now, let's talk about the writing and publication history of this play, and also the edition that I read. The Tempest was written around 1610 or 1611. This would be one of the final plays Shakespeare worked on, with Henry VIII and Two Noble Kinsmen coming after this one. I think there's even like speculation in the scholarship of how much of those plays Shakespeare actually wrote, if other people came in to help with both Henry VIII and especially I think Two Noble Kinsmen comes under this kind of scrutiny. Anyway, Shakespeare himself died only 5 or 6 years after writing The Tempest. The whole preceding century, and especially the last couple of decades, right up to 1610 or so, saw the British really kind of accelerate their international trade policies and eventually their colonization efforts. Again, though, this will be important for an analysis further on Other important context: even though many might associate Shakespeare with Queen Elizabeth I, she passed in 1603, at which point James I, the first Stuart monarch, inherited the crown. Anyway, while this play was written around 1610 and likely performed around then too, and then published as a part of the first folio in 1623, the first folio was a collection of 36 of Shakespeare's plays, in which they were first categorized as either comedies, histories, or tragedies. Jumping forward to today, the Folger's Shakespeare Library has these editions. This is mostly how I read my Shakespeare now. They all follow the same kind of style. I personally prefer the smaller dimensions, mass market kind of dimensions of this one. Every one of these plays includes some specific introductions for whichever play it is, but also all of these include more general explanations about what life was like in Shakespeare's time, what the Globe Theater was like, and what the theater in general was like at this time, with some of the more unusual languages like. They go into some of the words and strange terms. In some cases, or they also have like a section in these books about the points in which the editors altered or chose one version of the original text over another version of the original text. Let's say maybe there's a slight difference in what was printed in the little quarto formats, like kind of unofficial formats, compared to what was in that folio that I mentioned. The editors go through why they chose which version that they chose. So yeah, all really kind of helpful, insightful things like that. We don't need to get too detailed into that side of things though. I like these versions and I find them very approachable. When you get to the part of the book with the play itself, the right page of the text is all the actual text of the play. And then the left is always notes and explanations of strange terms and whatnot referenced on the opposite page. Sometimes there will even be brief synopses of the scene you're reading on that other opposite page, just in case you get confused. These editions also have a modern day perspective analytical essay at the end, and I always really enjoy reading those, usually 15 pages or so. This one, as is the case with some of the others I've read, this essay was written by Barbara Moet. Anyway, that should do it for kind of these more technical notes on the version of the play that I read, as well as the background on when the play was written, in the larger context of not only Shakespeare's body of work, but also the history of England. Now we can move into an analysis of the play. I mentioned at the beginning that I wanted to focus on two main ideas. One, the nature of magic and fantasy in The Tempest, and two, modern day post-colonial and anti-colonial attitudes and readings of this play. So, the magic. As referenced already, the magic of this book is all centered around our exiled duke and sorcerer Prospero. Prospero uses his magic to bind spirits to him and to make them do his bidding. And then these spirits, like Ariel, they can cause things like the titular Tempest, or they can make things appear like a feast to the other characters. The magic is used basically by Shakespeare as a tool by which his main character, Prospero, can get revenge on his enemies. And it's all more about interacting with and having power over spiritual and mythical entities than it is like any kind of modern fantasy magic system type of thing. Yeah, the deities and legends and everything referenced here are, for the most part, real-world stories and legends that Shakespeare's audience would have been familiar with, as opposed to those like secondary world inventions or a secondary world pantheon or anything like that. Shakespeare would allude to common myths like this in many of his works, but with a play like The Tempest or A Midsummer Night's Dream, the bard could bring some of these references to life, actually. Which I think you can see that's a common idea with all fantasy stories, bringing the more abstract ideas to life. So the study of magic in The Tempest, I think, can boil down to a study of Prospero's uses and sometimes abuses of magic and his power. He's the only human with magical ability in the story, and so this gives him great control over the course of the narrative. That essay at the end of this edition by Barbara Moet I mentioned before, this mentions that Prospero has often been interpreted as a kind of self-insert character for Shakespeare. I can definitely see where Moet and kind of that argument is coming from, and I think we can see this in a lot of modern day fantasy stories as well, where the author ultimately is controlling and manipulating events and characters to produce the most satisfying story and the most satisfying, like, emotional conclusion. And similarly, Prospero is literally within the story manipulating the other characters and events of the play to basically play out how he wants them to, similar to how Shakespeare does with all of his plays. Now, with such power, of course, we can go back to Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. And is Prospero always a benevolent, responsible sorcerer? I would say no. Likely considered a bit of a sketchy character at times back when the play was first performed, but I think he definitely would be considered a little bit villainous, at least a little bit villainous by today's standards. And kind of this bridges my gap into, or the gap into, my next topic. Post-colonialism and the Tempest. This can be a little bit heavy, so I'll, do my best to kind of go through beat by beat and explain what this has to do with a play written several centuries ago. So that context I mentioned earlier was actually really important. The fact that the English were really getting into the colonizing game, and we had Europeans getting more and more interested in the strange places and stranger peoples of other places around the world. While Shakespeare may have been writing the play at the beginning of all of this colonizing and imperialism, today we have the benefit of looking back at the horrors and widespread devastation brought on by European colonialism and imperialism across the world. So, how does Shakespeare introduce these ideas specifically in the play? Well, Prospero, our magician, not only enslaves the spirits of the island like Ariel, but he's also enslaved the sole remaining native inhabitant of the island, Caliban. Ariel is a loyal servant to his master, and so Prospero sets Ariel free at the end, whereas Caliban is a scheming, violent servant, and he's punished at the end. So we, of course, get this uncomfortable, evil kind of idea of, Prospero's really a good master and slave owner, and he only has to be cruel with the bad slaves like Caliban. Obviously a horrible kind of viewpoint and idea, but that's definitely a part of Prospero's mindset. Furthermore, let's zero in on Caliban, the slave specifically. He's painted as less than human, monstrous. There's even a reference to a time Caliban tried to rape Miranda, Prospero's daughter. This calls to mind kind of this horrible stereotype we get with colonial kind of narratives of the natives and savages taking your women and despoiling them, and how the virtuous civilized men of the world have to come in and protect their women from the savage natives. So that idea is definitely in here. That idea is definitely on Prospero's mind. This really racist idea. Or racist and kind of like fear-mongering idea. And then in the timeline of the story itself, what happens? Well, these two drunk servants of Duke Alonso find Caliban. Caliban mistakes them for being more powerful than they actually are. Maybe they're lords. I think there's kind of two ways to interpret Caliban's confusion about these two. One, you could read it as Caliban really is just being stupid, because obviously these two, Trinculo and Stefano, are idiots. Or two, another kind of angle is that Caliban recognizes that these two remind him of Prospero, likely coming from the same European lands, Italian lands. So Caliban hopes that they wield a similar level of power. Unfortunately, they don't, and they're idiots, but that's Caliban's hope. And then the real kind of eyebrow-raising part is the drinking and the alcohol. That these two get Caliban drunk, and they comment on how much he likes alcohol and how easy it is to get him drunk. Likely by accident, though. In doing so, these two, they hurt any chance Caliban had at escape or freeing himself. And this was such kind of a commonplace idea when it came to colonization, whether through alcohol, opium, what have you. The colonizer would try whatever they could to cripple the indigenous people's ability to fight back. This idea is very much present in our story here, and constantly it kept springing to mind whenever I got back to another one of these Caliban scenes. But I could probably go on and point out more and more kind of angles to pick this play apart and pick this story apart, but I think I've rambled on a little bit about this heavier stuff for enough for today, enough for a quick review of this play. Suffice it to say, I found The Tempest both whimsical and charming, but also very dark and thought-provoking at times. It's one of my new favorites, at least in Shakespeare's comedies subcategory, mostly because of the darker places he was willing to go and the more kind of unsettling colonial kind of ideas he was willing to play around with and put on display. And as I've hopefully shown, I think this play is ripe for all sorts of analysis and discussion, and I think it's a very important text in the development of the fantasy genre. So yeah, again, that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Please let me know what your thoughts are on this play down below. Also, if any of you have seen any particularly good productions or adaptations of The Tempest, I always love hearing about that stuff. Thanks again. Have a great day. Bye.